I am so glad to have everybody here today. Big chat today. A lot of us, this has been a burning question for many of us, and learning about equity is very important. Before we get into it, I want to cover some housekeeping before we get into our presentation today. First of all, this session will be very interactive, so do have your fingers ready and your chat open. We will be opening up for questions, so please keep them coming in. We will be recording the session. You will get a copy of the session likely sometime tomorrow once everything gets flushed out in the cloud and sent along. There'll be lots of materials that will be in the email, including a link. If you had not had a chance to participate in the survey, I'm dropping it in chat now. Take the 3 minutes to fill it in. This information will be very important. If you didn't already fill it in, you can start seeing some of those results in your email tomorrow as well. A little bit about our sponsors. I will pass it over to Maheen.
All right, so I wanted just to give a bit of a shout out to Milo Associates. So Milo Associates actually is a recruiting firm based in Chicago that focuses on customer success and technology hiring. And they actually strive to become the #1 talent resource in North America for customer success. Their mission is to create opportunities that mutually are beneficial for embracing strengths and values of both the individual and organization, ensuring professional satisfaction is a two-way street. So thank you, Milo. And then hopefully I hear Stacy, if she's online, to talk about Catalyst, our gold sponsor. I don't know if you're there, Stacy.
Hi, I'm here. Good
Hi,
to see you guys.
Hey, Stacy.
It's been a while. Cool. So quick overview on Catalyst. Catalyst is a customer success platform. So I imagine that would be a very relevant part of anyone's tool stack that is joining the call today. Catalyst is branding ourselves as a newer solution in the space, meant to be very quick to implement, a little bit more lightweight than some of the initial players in the space, and meant to really focus on end user experience. So really thinking about, as a CSM, do you really have a tool that helps you be more effective and efficient when it comes to managing your book of business, QBRs, at risk, renewals, all of those different things that I think, based on the conversations I have with folks, oftentimes end up in spreadsheets, or you as a CSM become responsible for managing a whole bunch of different tools and keeping them all updated manually. So that is the focus of Catalyst. I think Maheen will probably share a link to, if you'd like to see a demo, in the comments. And then also we recently started doing a monthly community demo. So if anyone here would be interested in seeing a demo, that is truly a no pressure situation. Sales does not follow up with any of the folks who attend that. Really want to give people the ability to kind of like learn about a new tool without being harassed by someone like me. So you are more than welcome to join those, and would love to see anybody here. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Always a pleasure having you here. Next, I want to open it up to today's speaker. I had the pleasure of seeing Chris speak a few times, and the last time he spoke specifically about equity and really blew my mind. For Chris, he is the co-founder and CEO of Nuffsaid. If you do not follow their blog, you totally should. The stuff that's in there is fantastic. Always great reads, always a highlight in my inbox that of all the emails that I get, that's actually one of the ones that I prioritize and read. So thanks, Chris, for all the great materials that you're continuing to contribute to customer success. So I'll pass it to Chris and let Chris introduce himself and what Nuffsaid is all about, and we'll get into our topic.
Thanks for joining today's Star. And by the way, everyone, today is Star's birthday. So please just drop a little happy birthday note for Star today. We're not going to spend too much time talking about Nuffsaid because you're not here to learn about Nuffsaid. But here's what I will share. Nuffsaid is building an AI-powered brain that helps you to focus on work that matters. Our initial target audience for the product is customer success. So we do a lot of work in the customer success category. If you haven't seen this already, we've published the first ever customer success magazine. We partner, like Star said, we partner with the customer success community to come up with some really big pieces that address the issues that customer success leaders are facing today. And just in general, we want to be known and perceived as partners to you in building your companies, and personally for you, helping you build your careers. So today's conversation is all about that. It's about talking about equity, talking about compensation, and helping to set customer success people up for better financial outcomes, both on the salary side, but I think maybe the more interesting part of today's conversation will be about equity. And the reason why it's so important is, when I have folks from other teams negotiate for their comp packages, I rarely get customer success people negotiating hard on equity. I frequently get salespeople, product managers, engineers. They're almost always negotiating hard on equity. Customer success generally isn't. So I think today is about learning more enough about equity so that you can be good advocates for yourself. And if your company is very successful, which many of yours will be, make sure that you have a nice financial outcome as a result of that. Because if your company is very successful, you can be talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that you will get in addition to your salary, but you have to do it right. If you do it wrong, you're going to miss out on that. So that's what today's conversation is all about. This conversation is primarily, the first conversation we're going to have together is primarily focused on learning about what equity is all about and how to think about it. Is designed for more of like if you are a CSM, a manager of CS, or a director, this is a good conversation for you. If you're in the audience and you happen to be a VP or a C-level executive and you already know a lot about equity, we are hosting an advanced equity training session for you. So in fact, I'm just going to drop in a link right now into the chat. And there you go. If you have a title of VP or Chief Customer Officer, if you feel like you already are an expert in equity, then you can, if you want, skip the session. You can sign up for the next one. And the reason why we separate them out is the things that we're going to talk about with the VPs. A VP is going to have a lot more leverage to negotiate things that you will not have if you're a CSM, a manager, or a director. So we'll have, when you get to that level, I want you to join this course. But for now, I'll teach you the things that you can control in your equity negotiations. So I dropped that a link in the chat. One last note before we get started: if you did not fill out the survey that Star sent out, the equity and compensation survey, please fill it out right now, because I'm going to take all the results, combine all of the responses together, and I'm going to send back out to each of you the cumulative results. So how much money are people in different types of roles making? That will help each of you be better advocates for yourself in your next salary review. So please take a moment right now, drop that link into the chat. So just click on that link. It only takes a couple of minutes to fill out, and the results will help everyone, including yourself, negotiate better in the future. So what we're going to talk about today is, first, we're going to look at the compensation survey data. We're going to focus more on base salary and bonuses. Then we're going to talk about how equity works and how to advocate for it. And then we'll finish at the end. If there are any questions, we'll take those questions then. I do have to give a disclaimer here, which I am not a licensed financial professional. I'm not giving any advice on this call. I'm just sharing my experiences with you. And so I have to direct you to your financial advisor for specific financial advice for your situation. Having said that, I'm going to give advice that I've given to a lot of people in the past. So, yeah, was there a question? No, okay. So who participated in the survey? So we've got the results that we're going to look at today are the result of 85 responses. On the graph, so you'll see what the distribution is. So about 22% of folks were at a VP level, 36% were at a director level, 16% at a manager level, and 22% at an individual contributor CSM level. And then in terms of stage of company, pretty nice mix. I mean, so we're going to see responses from companies as early as seed stage and as late as public companies, and good just distribution across the board. So we're going to get a pretty good look at what people are getting paid. So let's jump into the good stuff that everyone wants to see. So let's look at how base salaries are getting paid out. And we've separated the United States from Canada separately so that you can see what your counterparts in the United States are making, or at least United States-based companies. So if you are a CSM in Canada, on average, and this is on average across all the companies that we surveyed, CSMs are making about 82 grand. But notice that's a big difference compared to the average CSM in the United States, which is making about 115. So big delta there. And actually we see that delta decrease as seniority increases. So for a manager, if you're a manager of CSMs, again, you're going to be making about 85K in Canada, 115 in the US. As a director, you're going to be making 133 in Canada and about 150 in the US. And then check it out, at a VP level, you're going to make 208 in Canada and 194 base salary in the United States. So we're going to give I don't know what we're going to call this, the Canadian bacon and syrup award. I can't even joke about Canadians because you're such nice people compared to us in America. All right.
Chris, the question came in. I'm making an assumption here, and I just want to clarify the assumption. The average in Canadian is in Canadian dollars. The value in US that's here is probably in US dollars. Like there's no conversions happening, right?
Thank you. I actually did normalize it. All numbers I'm showing here are converted into US dollars.
Oh, okay. Thanks for normalizing it for us.
Yeah, so it's all normalized to US dollars. Yep.
And one other question came in from an individual. It just noticed like, wow, it's interesting that the managers in Canada and the ICs are pretty much in par.
Yes, and we saw that in both the US and Canada, interestingly. So that's consistent from both places. So managers of CSMs generally are not making a lot more than individual contributors. What I suspect is that we probably got more survey responses from senior CSMs that might be like, for example, managing enterprise or strategic accounts. They will typically be making more money than a CSM that's managing low touch customers. And there could be like a 10 or 15% delta between those two roles. And so there's a question from Quam. Is this survey based on the feedback? Yes, this is based on the survey results that we did with this group. We also had another small survey that went out to US-based participants. So the total number of responses for this, going back a slide, we have 80. The results that we're looking at are the result of 85. That's part of the reason why I'm just encouraging everyone, if you haven't already filled out the survey, just go ahead and do it right now. We'll try to get this up to about 110 or 115. That'll be a really good number to use when you advocate for yourself in your next salary review.
Awesome, thanks.
So now let's look at base and bonus relative to title. So what we're seeing is that American companies tend to give higher bonuses. And again, these are bonuses that could be tied to net retention rate. Actually, the most common things were company goals, gross retention rate, and net retention rate. Those were actually pretty evenly distributed as the reason for the bonus. American companies tend to give a higher bonus, so 15 to 20% compared to Canadian companies, which will tend to give a 10 to 15% bonus. Looks like Sachin's giving us a nice little blue marks on the screen. And then, so what are we looking at in terms of base plus bonus? So the difference between Canada and America starts to increase here. So in Canada, as a CSM, you can expect to make around 90K. In Canada, 125 in the United States. Managers do make more. So a manager in Canada, base plus bonus, is going to be making 95, compared to a manager in the US, which will be making 135. A director will be making 155 in Canada versus 193 in the US. And in Canada, 240 for a VP versus 245 for the US. And this is actually, these numbers are pretty good. I'm you know, when I talk to people about what they're making, this seems about right. My suggestion for each of you is to try to use the United States as a benchmark, obviously, because that's the salaries overall are higher. The role that's being performed is identical, and you have other choices. So in other words, you can use an offer from an American company, or at least the survey data from an American company, to talk about what the market rate is for the role. And so I think this is really strong evidence for you to go into your next salary reviews to advocate for your own salaries. Star, is there a way that we can get rid of that annotation? Maybe I can do it. There we go.
Oh yeah, there you
go. If there are any, by the way, folks, if you have any questions as we go ahead and just add them into the chat. I'll do my best to address questions as they come in. So I'll pause here in case I see any questions so far on this data. Again, this will all be shared out with you later. You don't have to memorize this. You'll get a chance to see these slides after everyone has filled out the surveys.
Chris, just a commentary there, because I know you mentioned, like, you know, if you're going to go out and talk about increasing base for an individual contributor, to take into consideration that they might also have to share this information, because their boss might also need to get an increase, because they might be actually asking for more than their boss is making in some cases.
That's great. Yeah, if you can share this with your boss, everyone on the team gets pay bumps and everybody wins.
Exactly.
I saw someone come off of mute. I don't know if that was a question coming. No. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. So let's look at what salaries look like for each role relative to company stage. And again, in this case, we're actually blending the US and Canadian salaries together. So think of this more in terms of directional trends as opposed to the actual numbers. But what we're seeing here is that in general, if you are working at a private company that's venture funded, whether it has seed funding, Series A, Series B, or Series C, not really a big difference in pay between those stage companies. Where you do start to see salaries increase is when you're late stage, and this kind of makes sense, right? You've got a company that's late stage, they're looking to acquire, you know, they're willing to spend a lot of money to acquire the talent that they need to drive the company through to some kind of exit, whether it's an IPO or an acquisition. And so Series D, Series E plus companies tend to get paid very, very well. And public companies look to be about roughly 10 or 15% higher than earlier stage private companies. There's a question here from James. You asked, are there any assumptions about why there's this disparity between US and Canada? Is it comparable for other job roles? Yes, I have seen a similar disparity for other roles. I think it's just because in general, the tech market isn't as mature in Canada. And so it's easier for Canadian companies to take someone with a little bit less experience, onboard them, pay them a really good salary compared to what they could make in other industries. And so they just don't, Canadian companies aren't, right now at least, aren't forced to pay salaries at the US level. You can be part of changing that, by the way. So use this presentation to help change that trend.
Oh, snap. He works for me there, Chris. Thanks.
That's okay. I mean, look, the reality is I think CSMs are some of the most valuable people at the company. You are the gatekeepers of the relationship with the customer. You understand what the weaknesses are in the business with respect to the product, sales, overselling deals, pricing being set incorrectly, content that's going to work better for the customers. And so it's good for the industry in general to be leveling up the compensation for CSMs. Does location not play as significant of a role in Canada? We didn't actually look at the differences between coasts, Renata, if that's the basis of your question. We just looked at Canada as a country versus US as a country. Okay, so on the manager side of thing, we're seeing a similar trend. The difference in CS management, not a big, honestly, I'm not seeing any real trends here. There's not enough data to see major trends. I do see that Series E plus companies, the average here is higher. I think that could be skewed by a couple of folks that are making more. I think just in general, managers won't expect to be paid more as the company gets more mature, or at least not that much more. If we jump ahead to look at directors and VPs, it really does change when you start to get to more senior roles. Directors, kind of as you'd hope and expect, they do get paid more as the company stage becomes more mature. So 113 at a seed company versus 175 at a Series E plus. And for VPs, 120 at a seed company, all the way up to 250. I mean, I'm seeing kind of like 200 to 250 is about right for a Series D plus or a public company. Going back to this previous one, Mahan, you said odd that Series B comp is lower than A or C. Remember, this is the data set is small enough here where this is not a meaningful difference right here. This is probably just from a small data set. I bet if we got 10,000 responses, I think we would see across the board minimal difference between companies between seed and Series C on the compensation for a CSM. Okay, James looks like James is gonna put in something in his one-on-one with you next, Star. So you got a fun conversation coming up here. All right,
raises all around.
And then finally, let's look at the base and the bonus relative for individual contributors and managers. So for individual contributors, again, you know, in Canada, the numbers you could expect to be 10% lower. In the United States, 10 to 15% higher. But just generally, I'm seeing a trend where as the company stage evolves, the overall base plus bonus increases the way that you would expect. So you're gonna go from like around 90 at an early stage company up to, let's say, like 115 to 120 at a later stage company. And then for managers, you know, you can expect to be, let's call it also around 90, maybe around 100. But you can certainly see that there are companies that are paying for managers. There are examples of companies that are much more aggressive. So there's for Series E plus, we actually got several folks that were making in the high 180s. And so again, so for directors and VPs, kind of same trend it follows. You know, you will make more money as a director and as a VP as the company matures. There's kind of this consistent trend where Series D and Series E companies tend to be paying the best right now. So if you want to kind of maximize your personal income, kind of in any role in the company, those are the companies right now that are paying the most. All right, I'll just pause here before we move on to equity. I'll just pause in case there are any questions on the compensation stuff that we just went through.
Chris, I know you've done this presentation several times, right? And
Yep.
with different types of subsets of data. Is there anything that has come up that's been pretty surprising as you've been stepping through it, whether it's like with our group or any other group that, you know, gives you pause and ponder for food for thought?
That's a good question. I don't think because I've seen a lot of CS salaries over the years, not really surprised about these salary numbers. You know, I guess, you know, I'm just going to go back to my original point. I think that CSMs and managers deserve to be paid more relative to their impact on the business.
Yeah. Is
And
there
by
any,
the way,
do you see like any, because we talk about CS holistically, right? Which means like in some cases there's onboarding, there's support, there's success management, etc. When we're talking about all of this, we are still talking holistically. Is there a lot of, because there is a lot of variation that's happening from success management versus onboarding / services versus support as well.
Yep.
Is there anything that stood out in between those three that you've noticed it, or do you feel that most of these numbers represent more of the success management side of things?
They definitely represent more of the success management side of things. I can tell you for sure that support gets paid less than success. Success gets paid more when it carries a quota. So if success isn't responsible for revenue at all, the CSMs get paid less, just full stop. So if you are willing to take on a little bit of risk, carry a bag for the company, you will get paid more for that. You'll be rewarded for that. Onboarding specialists also tend to make less than CSMs. Not always, but they tend to, onboarding specialists often end up being folks that are earlier in their careers, and the career path is to start with like a junior CSM role or an onboarding specialist role, and then you kind of through your career grow up into, you know, maybe a CSM that's managing customers, and then from there maybe you grow into a role where you're managing enterprise or strategic accounts. So that'd be a typical career path. So I would say onboarding specialists, so customer support will earn the least, then onboarding specialists, then junior CSMs, senior CSMs, and strategic CSMs.
Thank you, very helpful. There's a few additional questions came in from chat from Nicole. Do you think salaries will stagnate due to more employees working remotely?
Will they stagnate? They would only stagnate if there was an influx of talent and companies could access the talent that they need much more easily. And I don't think remote changes a company's ability to access talent in general. And the reason why I'm saying that is companies, for example, are looking for people who have customer success experience. Whether you're working from home or in the office, there's a certain number of people in the world right now who have customer success in their title, and that doesn't change with people working at home. So I don't think that salaries will stagnate because of remote work. In fact, I think probably in general, it will cause a general lifting of salaries for people that live outside of major cities like, you know, Toronto or Vancouver, San Francisco, etc. So Dan, you asked, should you take 10% off the numbers? You should take 10% off of these numbers that I'm looking at right here. But in the earlier slides, base and bonus relative to job title, you don't have to take anything off here. We've actually broken out Canada separate from the United States. So only take 10% off of the combined numbers here when we're looking at base and bonus relative to company stage.
All right, we're about halfway through our time here,
Okay.
Chris. I'm sure a lot of people are excited to learn, what is this equity all about?
Yeah, well, the last note that I want to make, you know, James can't come to your next one-on-one star and just demand more salary based on these survey results. The other thing to consider is how much leverage you have, and the amount of leverage you have is based on your performance. So if you are a strong performer on your team, you will have more alternative job options available to you because you're a star and everyone will want you to be on their team. So if you're someone who's consistently overperforming, you've done a great job managing your accounts, your numbers look great, your gross and net retention numbers look great, the company is going to want to stretch to keep you. And so having data like this is helpful in negotiating what your raise should come to. But if you've had kind of average performance, or your manager doesn't think of you as being an all-star, you'll have a lot less leverage. So just be aware of that when you go into your next salary review. Ask for more at the right time when you have been performing really well and you've got a lot of leverage in your company. All right, let's move on to equity. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to give you a tool, by the way, to calculate the value of your equity, but we're going to build up to that first. So for the first thing I want to ask is, we're going to do an example. We're going to do an example where a company has issued you one stock option. All right. So if the company gives you one option, how much stock do you own? Can I get an answer? Sorry, James, you can't.
You got a lot of zeros and one,
Zeros.
100,
Nada.
nada.
Good. Yes, that's the right answer. If the company gives you one option, you right now own 0 stock in your company. You own nothing. And let's talk about the dynamics of how this works. So what the company is saying is, I'm going to set aside one stock option, and you have the choice to buy that stock option or not. And if you don't buy it within a certain amount of time, me, company, I'm going to take it back from you. That's actually the way the stock option works. So if we go into a practical example here, let's just say a company issues you a stock option, one option, and they say, hey, you can buy this option for 15 cents. All right. And you'd say, well, why would I do that? Well, right now, you don't really have a way to do anything with that option. So you might say, well, I don't really want to buy that option because I don't get any value from it. So that's fine. But let's just say 3 years from now, the value of that option, of that stock, goes to $3 and the company is sold. Well, at that point, you can, and actually, let's talk about what these things are. 15 cents and $3. What are these two things? 15 cents is what's called the strike price, which is the price, the cost to you to buy that option and convert it into a share of stock in the company. And the value is hopefully a number that's continuing to increase over time. That's what that share is worth. All right. So in the case where the company sells for $3, the way that it works is you're going to buy that share for 15 cents, and then you're going to sell it to someone else, maybe to the acquirer, for $3. So your net total value on that is $2.85. So it's the $3 minus the cost to buy it. All right, so that's the basics of how an option works. Now let's talk about the next thing, which is dilution. One of the great gifts from Canada here, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. And what he's going to say is, this is actually how it works, by the way, when CEOs are negotiating for raising money from investors. And so an investor will come and say, I'll give you $15 million in exchange for 20% ownership in your company. And the CEO, I don't know, depending on the stage, they might take that. They might think that's a good deal. And so what does that happen? What happens to your one stock option? Well, the company has to create new stock, which means that but the value of the company hasn't gone up. So that means that each share in the company goes from being worth $3 to $2.40, which means that the total value of your stock went from $2.85 to $2.28. You're going, why the hell would a company raise money? That seems like a really bad deal. Well, of course, the reason why a company wants to raise money and give up some ownership in the company is that the hope is that this stock would go from $2.40 to $5 with the funding that it just received. But it's just important for you to know that every time the company raises money, the percentage ownership that you have in the company decreases. So you'll get a smaller piece of the total pie when the company sells. All right, and the last, why does the company have to create new stock? Does it create 20% more stock based on the situation? Yes, that's exactly what happens. The company actually, let's just say that there are 100 total slices of pizza. The company will create 20 new slices of pizza for the new investor. So your slice, the slice that you had, if you had one of the 20, your slice got smaller because you had to make room for 20 more slices. That's practically behind the scenes. That's actually how fundraising works. You get new money, in exchange, the company creates new shares for the new investor. Amir says, ideally from a larger pizza. On day one, it's not from a larger pizza, but you can increase the value of the company over time. So that is part of a larger pizza. That's the whole goal, right? The whole goal is to, let's take that stock price from 240, let's drive it up to $5 or $6. All right, so the last thing that we just need to be aware of, I think probably most people on the call will be familiar with this, is the vesting schedule. The way that most tech companies work is they will issue you stock options with a 4-year vesting plan and a 1-year cliff, which means that in the first year, there's a 1-year cliff, which means in the first year, none of the stock belongs to you. In fact, if you leave before the year is up, you forfeit all of your stock and there's nothing you can do about it. After a year, those options that were granted to you, 25% of them become available to you to buy. Every month after that, 1/48 of the original amount is also available for you to buy. The reason why companies put in place this 1-year cliff is they don't want you to, they want it as a retention mechanism. So if you come to the company, you're a terrible fit, you don't add much value to the company, they don't want you to get ownership in the final company outcome. Saman asks, is this true for RSUs as well? Yes, RSUs also have vesting schedules, and most of the time they usually have a 1-year cliff as well. There's a slight difference in the way that RSUs are granted. RSUs are actually, in many cases, RSUs are actually stock. So they're not giving you an option, they're actually giving you a stock. And the reason why it's not called an SU, the reason why it's RSU means it's a restricted stock unit, which means that there are a bunch of rules in place around how that stock unit vests and when you owe taxes on them. So how does the company establish the strike price for the options? The way that works is it's actually a total scam, just so everyone knows. So the way it works is the CEO goes to a 409A valuation firm. That's what it's called when you determine the strike price. So you get a new 409A valuation, which is a IRS approved valuation. It's a third party auditor, basically, that comes in, looks at what your company's doing, looks at what sales have been. They look at what the preferred price of stock is, which is how much money what investors think the company is worth, and then they kind of like put their finger in the wind and they give you a number. And CEOs have a lot of power to influence and control that number. Savvy CEOs keep that strike price as low as possible for you. And the reason why is when you go to buy your stock option, they don't want you to have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to buy your stock. So that's how the strike price is determined. It's kind of magic, and the CEO has a lot of power to control it. Good CEOs keep the strike price low. That's a good question. Is it similar in Canada? That's right. The 409, that's a good call. The 409A process is the process that US companies have to follow. I actually don't know what the Canadian process is. I imagine it's very similar. Star, do you happen to know?
It is kind of similar. I just forget what it's called, but
okay.
There is a similar process. And something actually to note that a lot of Canadian companies actually have US-based investors, and they actually, even though they operate in Canada, they will perform from a shares perspective from a US point of view.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's look at a calculator, which, by the way, I will share with everyone after this call. But this is a way for you to assess the value of the equity that you've been given. All right, the numbers that you'll need to drive this chart on the right come from the variables on the left. So these are the things you're going to have to get from your company in order to determine the price or the value of your stock. All right. So the first thing that you need is to know how many options that you've been granted and the strike price. That will actually come from Carta, or a lot of times the company will issue you a physical piece of paper that tells you how many options have been set aside for you. All right, so that's pretty easy for you to plug in. And the combination of these two is recorded here. This is the cost to you to buy your stock options. Okay, that 15-cent price point will stay the same during the lifetime of the company. It doesn't ever go up. There is one tax implication that we might have time to talk about later. But it's going to cost you, regardless of where the company's at, it's going to cost you if you had 50,000 options at 15 cents per option, you're going to have to pay the company $7,500 to buy those options and to convert them into shares. All right, what else do you need? You want to plug in what your salary is, your annual salary. You're going to want to know from the company, what % of the company do you own? So that's going to be the total number of shares, total number of options, divided by the total number of shares that the company has available in its stock pool. And that's going to be your percentage. CEOs sometimes are hesitant to share this number. If they are, they're probably trying, it's likely that you've been granted a very small percentage and they don't want you to know what it is. So they're intentionally being opaque. They don't want to be transparent because they don't want you to know that they've given you a very small amount of stock. The last things that you need are to plug in how long is the vesting schedule. In most cases, it's going to be 4 years. And how much dilution? We talked about dilution earlier. How many Kevin O'Leary moments are going to come where the investor comes in and says, I'm going to give you money in exchange for 20% of your business? All right, so with that, we can start plugging in some numbers. So each column represents a milestone of a company's success. So ideally, your company provides you a couple of comparable companies who have valuations at each of these milestones. So what do I mean by that? So let's say the company says, hey, we could exit this company for $125 million. Ideally, they can give you at least one example of another company kind of like yours who's either exited or been valued at that level. So that's kind of one thing to ask for, of course, is if the company has comparables of other companies like you or kind of in a similar category that have been able to be valued at that level. And by the way, what you're looking for here is it realistic that the company can actually have an exit, can actually be acquired for $125 million? So that's the first thing to ask for. Then we're going to plug in.
How does IPO fall into that? Like, is that like a down the line type of thing? Because
yeah, so the IPO, most people think that it's very fancy. It's not. It's just another funding round. So rather than a VC coming to you and saying, I'm going to give you $100 million in exchange for 20% of the business, instead it's the public markets come to you and say, we're going to give you $100 million in exchange for 51% of your company. So that's the mechanics of going public. It's just another funding round. But going public, it's basically the public markets will value your company at one of these levels. So, you know, when you go public, we're going to say, okay, the market thinks that your company is worth $5 billion. So the mechanics are exactly the same in terms of valuing the company. It's the same between an investor buying you versus an investor investing versus a company buying your company versus going public. Looks like we got a couple questions here. I wasn't paying attention. Amir asks, as an employee, would you be able to exercise at the IPO versus other raises? The way that most stock option plans are set up, once you pass the 1-year cliff, you can exercise, you can convert any of your options that have vested into shares. In the United States, at least, and I'm sure Canada has something similar. I actually don't know the tax rules there, but in the United States, if you buy a stock option and you hold it for 1 year and 1 day, you actually don't pay, that your tax rate is way lower. So you pay rich people tax rates rather than poor people tax rates. Poor people tax rates are the rates that you pay on your income, and they're way higher. The reason why I'm calling them rich people tax rates, I know some people find that offensive, but it's the reality. Rich people organize their income and their assets to pay rich people taxes. They very rarely seek to make income from companies because it's taxed at such a high rate. So I actually don't, you have to check in with what the rules are in Canada, but I bet there's something very similar like that in place.
If you have to ask the question, what is rich people tax rate? You know you're not in it.
That's also true. That's also true. So James, you're asking like what's an average number of shares? The number, just to be clear, the number of shares means nothing, means zero. A lot of CEOs try to trick you by giving you a lot of shares. If you have, just think about it like this. If you have 10 shares in a company that has 100 shares total, you've got 10% of the company. That's really good. If you have 10 shares of a company that has 10 million shares, then you don't own anything and your stock is worth almost nothing. So just to be clear, the number of shares, don't let a CEO trick you. Number of shares means nothing. We don't care about the number of shares with respect to valuing equity. What we care about is what percentage of the company you own. The reason why that's important is we're going to say, okay, let's say the company is worth $250 million when it sells. I own 0.25%. And I'm expecting that in order to get to 250, the company will have to raise one more round of cash, which means I'm going to take a 20% dilution hit. So my stock will be worth 20% less. And so the total value of my stock, if I own 0.25%, is $500,000. Now I also have to pay $7,500 to buy those options, so I don't get that full 500,000. So assuming that my annual salary is 150K, assuming that I work at the company for 4 years, and assuming that the company exits for 250, then my total comp per year is going to be 273. So it's taking into account my base salary plus the value of my equity divided by 4 years. Felix, you asked a kind of a technical question. Can shares of a private company be held under a registered savings account? This is something that you have to ask your financial advisor about. I don't actually know the rules in Canada. I think in the United States, the only way that you can hold them in like an IRA or a retirement account is if you are an investor in the company, not if you're just buying existing shares. But again, talk to a financial advisor about that one for Canada. James, the root of your question might be in terms of ownership percentage. Is there a hierarchy of how much you should get for your role and seniority? It's less, just it's less standardized for individual contributors. So for CSMs, managers, and directors, it's a lot less standardized. It tends to be more standardized for VP and C-level executives. So again, this goes back to leverage. A lot of times companies, like for example, if you're willing to say, James, if you're willing to say to Star, look, I'm willing for you to pay me 20K less, but in exchange, I'd love some more equity. I bet that's something that she would entertain because it helps her hit her budget numbers, gives you more upside if the company is successful.
Chris, adding on to that a little bit as well, a lot of companies will give every employee shares that's there, which is also another form of dilution as well that sometimes does not get chatted about. Do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same concept. If the more shares that are issued to people, the smaller percentage of the pie that I own. So I think the good news though, Star, is in the case where a company is issuing equity to everyone, it's almost always a really tiny number. And so this might be a case for like, a company like, I'm going to make something up, like Walmart. They wouldn't actually ever do this because they aren't generous like this, but they might say, okay, well, all of our workers who are in retail, all of our workers that are working in the warehouses, we're going to give everybody a little bit of equity so that if the company, goes public, everyone gets some extra cash in their pocket. I don't think I've ever seen a case where a company issued equity to everyone and it was a substantial amount of equity.
That's true. But at some point I've seen companies hit like a certain stage and it actually no longer gives equity packages like to all employees. So you might hit a Series C, for example, and now because you hit a certain threshold of employees, that you no longer issue shares.
You're saying the opposite of that. You're saying companies don't issue shares. Oh, 100%.
Well,
In fact,
they stop at a certain point because they don't actually want to over dilute the shares.
Yes. So just in general, how do investors make their money? Well, investors make their money by putting in a bunch of cash into a company, owning as much of it as they can, and then getting the company acquired or going public. So the VCs actually don't want me to teach you the stuff that I'm teaching you now, because it will ultimately decrease the total piece size of the pie. It's a zero-sum game. The more that you get, the less that they get. So as the company gets further along in its maturity, as it raises more money, there definitely comes a time when the CEO is under pressure to stop issuing stock options. And by the way, a lot of people don't know a lot about stock options, so they don't ask about it, they don't care about it. So frankly, it's kind of unfortunate, but a lot of workers don't value the equity. And so a lot of times the CEO is saying, well, if my workers don't value it, why am I issuing it? So that comes up a lot too. So you have to be a good advocate for yourself, make sure that you ask for equity. Look, a lot of the companies that you're going to work for will fail, but you're probably going to have a couple of wins in your career, and the financial implications of a win. I mean, just look at, if you had 0.25% of an early stage company that goes, exits for $1 billion, you're making $2 million. I mean, you might not retire on that, but it might be close. So very important to make this part of your negotiation.
The last question before we wrap up, Chris, is a question from Amanda, that if you're not happy with the ownership stake that the company has given you, is there any strategies or ways in which you can offset that so you can maybe negotiate for a little more?
So what I would say is the more junior your role is, the less leverage that you have, just as a general rule. So increasing your impact on the company increases your leverage. So being a better performer, moving up in seniority, those things increase your leverage. Being willing to give up some salary in exchange for equity, that increases your leverage. That's a good way that you can step up your ownership percentage. And I mean, maybe the most harmful to relationship building would be to just go out and do a couple of job interviews to test the market and to see what other companies are offering in terms of equity for the same role. And you can bring that information back to your current employer.
Awesome. Chris, anything you want to say to wrap up before we close up at 6?
I'm glad you said that, because my calendar appointment had us down for another 30 minutes. So sorry, I didn't manage your time very well to that. How about this? If anyone has questions, Star, is it okay if they email them to you?
Yep.
And you can
or
compile them.
Yeah, post them into our Slack channel.
Okay,
that's
good.
there, and then I will consolidate them and I will share them back to our new friend Chris.
Okay. And again, as each of you start to move up in your maturity at the company, your role is growing and increasing. I do have an advanced training course where we will help for people where you're able to negotiate for a lot of stock. We're going to talk about ways that you can significantly protect your stock and make sure that it's maximized in its value, so that the returns from that event really can be life-changing. So, and I posted that link at the top of the chat. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining today. Thank you, Star, for inviting me. Happy birthday. And once we get all the survey responses back, we'll reply back with this calculator, the salary survey results, and we'll answer any questions that are left.
Excellent. And in the meantime, we will send over a copy of the recording tomorrow, so everybody has a copy of it. So if you haven't taken the opportunity to fill in the survey for the compensation, please, please, please fill it in. It's very important. And there'll be a few other goodies in the email tomorrow, so stay tuned for that as well. Thanks, Chris, so
Awesome.
much for
Thank
being
you.
here. Greatly appreciate you taking the time to educate the community.
Thanks, everyone.
All
Have a
right.
good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.